Well, hello and welcome to yet another fantabulous episode of the podcast Grow, Transform, and Evolve, where we talk all things personal and professional development. And as always, I'm excited about the topic of discussion and the guest we're having. I think it's, again, one of those relevant topics. We're going to be talking about insights into persuasive selling skills, success, the art of persuasion, with author, TEDx speaker, consultant, Brian Ahearn. But before we get into that, I just want to really hit the point home that I think this is one of those great topics. I know I, for one, am not someone who likes to be interrogated, told what to do. I like that more collaborative atmosphere, that more two-on-two dialogues versus monologues. I don't know anyone who likes to be lectured. I would rather persuade and be persuaded. So I'm very anxious to hear what our guest Brian has to say. And I think this takes even more interest, more importance as we are going on with these crazy times, this fast-paced, high-tech, ever-evolving world where change is hitting us faster than ever, adversity striking deeper, and the speed at which we need to make decisions is getting faster and faster. And add on the complexities of COVID. So people are already stressed. So I don't think they like to be lectured to, told what to do. So I think the art of persuasion has always, in my opinion, been very important, but it's more important now than ever. So I'm looking forward to this discussion with a very qualified person on this topic. So before we get into introducing Brian Ahearn, I want to state two quotes actually in honor of Brian and this topic today, both around persuasion, as I always start off with a motivational quote to once again begin my podcasts. The first spot is by Aesop. Gentle persuasion succeeds where force fails. Then Jenny Mullen, a great quote that states, I think the power of persuasion would be the greatest superpower of all time. So once again, it's a great skill set, and I think even more relevant today than ever. And it's going to carry onward as well, too, the importance of this topic, because even after COVID, we're still in this crazy, it's still going to get faster, more intense. And the ability to persuade others, I think, will be a point of differentiation for leaders, individuals, organizations as well, too. So I'm looking forward to this topic. With that said, our guest today is Brian Ahearn. He is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People, an international trainer, TEDx presenter, and consultant. He specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday business situations. And I'm assuming that ties to personal situations as well, too. We'll ask him. Brian spent more than 30 years in the insurance industry. He is the only one of 20 individuals in the world who currently holds the Cialdini method certified trainer designation, and the only person who holds it in the insurance space. I want to make sure I pronounce that right. I'm Italian. I should have pronounced that right. Brian's first book, Influence People, Powerful Everyday Opportunities to Persuade That Are Lasting and Ethical, was named one of the top 100 influence books of all time by Book Authority. Great accolade there. And his new book, Persuasive Selling and Relationship-Driven Insurance Agents, debuted in January and as an Amazon new release bestseller in several categories. Sorry, I'm stumbling there a little bit, Brian. I had a late night last night getting in. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Grow, Transform, and Evolve. And I'm sure you're going to be this is going to be the perfect topic for helping people in these crazy times. What say you?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm
My
excited
pleasure.
to get an opportunity to chat with you and share with your listeners.
Excellent. I mean, I mentioned that I think this topic, it's always been important, but I think even more so now with the intensity of change, adversity, COVID. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely true. In the economy that we were in prior to the pandemic, almost everybody was succeeding, and you didn't have to be outstanding to succeed. And then once everything changed, you better be outstanding if you want to succeed. And a huge component of people's success on the professional level is their ability to get others to say yes to them. And
that's right.
And you know this, Steve. For example, in sales, prospects don't become clients till they say yes to your proposal. Many of your listeners may be in management positions. They've got great ideas. Those ideas go nowhere until somebody above them says yes. And
That's
even
right.
those who are leaders that are listening, I always say it doesn't matter how good your mission, your vision, your values are if you can't get people to buy in and say yes and execute. So it's critical to your
I could
profession.
have used you this week. I was talking with one of my clients. I run a program called ACT, Align, Communicate, and Teamwork. And alignment is basically, have a solid vision, mission, values set in stone, not just talk the talk, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk.
Yep.
And be able to effectively communicate that down through the organization. And then each department within the organization owns that vision, mission, values, and the strategic objectives. They don't just know them, but they own them, they live them, and they function like an effective team. And I'm sure influence is, that's a perfect tie-in, cross-functionally and vertically and horizontally as well too. So
Absolutely. I mean, because again, if you can have the best mission, the vision and values, but then you have to communicate it. And that's where the art of influence and persuasion comes in. Can you give that message in a way that resonates with people and they get on board?
Yeah.
As opposed to just putting up a bunch of bullet points on a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. And I'd say this, not all people want to be or would be persuaded in the same way. I mean, some people like change, some people don't like change. Some people are more willing to do something risky, others not. Is that fair to say too? And the way you address those people is relevant to them?
Absolutely. There's also something we talk about called persuasion. And what is it that you can do beforehand to set the stage to make it easier for someone to say yes? In the world that I came from, Steve, which is insurance, you have some people who are very risk averse. You have some people that are very risk tolerant. If an insurance agent has somebody who's risk tolerant, but they know that they might be taking on too much risk, the question becomes, what can I do to make them a little more risk averse? How can I communicate in a way that gets them thinking a little more conservatively so that they're more open to coverages that will protect them in their business? So when you look at the broad spectrum of employees, absolutely, there are going to be some who resist change, who just don't like that. And you may want to set the stage a little differently when talking to some of those people versus those are going to probably buy in because they're already all in on the mission.
Right. So yeah, not all people created the same. And I think with the stressors of the world today, those people who have a tendency to be more risk averse are going to be even more unable to be moved, so to speak, especially if you're a type A personality, you're going at them hard. You're just feeding into more fear, more of their unwillingness to take a risk or make a change. So Great stuff. So I do want to come back to that's what we're going to spend most of our time on. Great stuff. But I do want to let's talk about your history a little bit. Your just a top line of your background. I think 30 some years in insurance. Mm-hmm. Then how did you transition into this world of personal and professional development?
Well, when I was in the insurance industry, it was almost 20 years ago. I was involved with sales training and really starting to get into the personal and professional development. And then I came across Robert Cialdini's material. And it's not an overstatement to say that it changed the course of my career and the course of my life. I say it changed the course of my life because I've incorporated these principles into how I communicate with people on a personal level as well as professional. So interacting with my wife, raising our daughter. But when I came across his material, it resonated with me. And I knew this is what I want to do with the rest of my career. Yeah. And so about 10 or 12 years ago, I started planning my exit from the insurance industry, from the corporate side. I built the website, I got the domain name, and I began to really build out my social media presence. Everything was the thought of one day I'm going to step away from this and I want something fully formed to step into. I ended up doing that a little sooner than what I expected. Changes were happening. I wasn't completely in alignment. You understand that. I wasn't in alignment with the vision of the company. And so it was better to step away than to be a detractor and be an unhappy employee.
Yeah.
And I was able to step into something that was fully formed. Now, having said that too, it was a lot more challenging than I expected because there's so much, as a business owner. But boy, I was certainly fortunate that I started doing all of that work early on. And so that was really my entree into this influence and persuasion. And the reason I'm passionate about it is because I know at the end of the day, it can help people on a professional level and it can help them on a personal level.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a pretty good mission in life.
I'll tell you what, we need to talk after this more. I mean, we've talked a good bit up front, but our backgrounds and our transition from corporate America into this personal and professional development world is almost exactly the same. So with that, it's going to drive a question. So you got certified in it's Cialdini when you were still in the corporate world, and that was one of those foundational elements that you learn to give you the strength to indeed say, hey, I know I can succeed in my own world as well too. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Robert Cialdini is the most cited living social psychologist on the planet when it comes to the science of ethical influence. And so to be certified and learn his methodology was a huge factor for me, because there are, I mean, in his field, he's the rock star. And there are so many people who, when I would reach out to connect on LinkedIn or back in the early days of Facebook, when they realized that I was associated with him, that was instant credibility.
Yeah.
And I've had clients who find me because they want somebody who's trained in Cialdini's methods to work with their organization. So it's been a huge, huge factor in terms of my credibility with current and potential clients.
Excellent. So I'm certified in DISC, Myers-Briggs, BARA, and EQ, and I've talked about that in the previous episodes, a little bit of it. I had one of my most recent guests was a big hitter in emotional intelligence, EQ. Tell me a little bit about the Cialdini method and what is it, and are there similarities between DISC, Myers-Briggs? Is there connections with Carl Jung? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so Robert Cialdini was a professor emeritus at Arizona State University, and his area of expertise is the science of influence. So as a social psychologist, he decided that's what he would study. And he did something that was unique, Steve. He took a nearly 3-year hiatus from his teaching job back in the late 70s, early 80s to go out into what we'll call the real world and got jobs like selling cars, working at an electronics store, working for portrait like Olin Mills. His thought was, if I really want to understand the psychology of persuasion, I need to, 1, observe people who are really good at it, and 2, learn from the training that they're getting. And once he did that and he synthesized all this information, he took his background in social psychology and he said, you can take almost everything I've learned and put it into 6 categories of human behavior. And he coined the term the principles of influence or principles of persuasion. And so he had 6 of these principles that he looked at and said, this explains most of human behavior when it comes to getting people to take action. And from there, then he built out a methodology in terms of how we talk about this, how we train people on this, how we interact with them to help them see the opportunities that are there. And I'll give you like one small example. When it comes to building relationships, most people understand when somebody likes them, but a lot of people don't necessarily know why. So we teach people about, this principle of liking, which says it's easier for us to say yes to those we know and like, and what causes liking to happen. And we teach them some of those things because, if you're hiring a new sales rep, you want that person to get in and make relationships quickly, good, strong relationships with clients. And if they understand what causes liking to happen, they can be very strategic in terms of what they're going to do to make that happen.
Gotcha.
And everybody wins. So that's one small example of the methodology.
Love it. So a lot of people, especially in the sales roles or management leadership role, think that liking them means having a good like relationship means, I know everything about your wife, kids, and family. We go to lunch together. We go to dinner together. And I always tell sales folks, that's not necessarily true. I mean, yes, some people are like that, but other people might want, hey, help me grow my business. Help me beat my competition. Help me, create a point of differentiation versus my competition. Whereas another one, like we mentioned earlier, could say, minimize my risk for me. I want to do something. I want to make a change, but I'm afraid to. Help me. Is it fair to say that the way that they vary with each person?
They do. There are some people who really want to have strong relationships. There are some people who don't care as much about it.
Yeah.
Somebody that I worked with who was a field sales rep in the state of Mississippi put it well when she said, When you walk into an insurance agent's office in the state of Mississippi, if you don't talk SEC football for at least 10 minutes, you aren't getting business.
That's right. That's right.
Now, contrast that with somebody in New York who probably is looking at their watch going, don't waste my time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You would never want to be impolite, but you're not going to press as much to try to invoke liking. I always tell people too that liking may not be the reason that you get business, but if somebody doesn't like you, it's almost guaranteed you'll never get the business.
That's right. That's right.
So it is part of the foundation, and it may not be the deciding factor, but boy, you got to take that first step.
Absolutely.
To some degree.
Is there a connection between liking and trust? I mean, I always talk about, you have to get your customers to trust you first before they open up and share. If my customer doesn't trust me, they may not tell me their real needs. They may beat me up on price because they're here to just get the lowest price. But when they trust me, they will open up and share more of what's keeping them up at night and allows me to solve their problems. And I always say, when someone trusts you, when you're viewed as a consultant rather than a vendor, you're viewed for the value you bring rather than the price of your product. So you're going to be viewed for value versus what's the lowest price, because when you're viewed for the value, that ties into a long-term sustainable business. When you're beating me up on price all the time, you view me as a commodity, a vendor selling a commodity, and what's the lowest price. That's not a great way to build a long-term relationship. So is there a trust between the liking, or a relationship between the liking and the trust? I'm assuming there is.
There is. And when we talk about trust, there are two avenues. There's through liking, and then also what we call authority. And we can talk about that one in a little bit. But when it comes to the principle of liking, this principle, the key to this, Steve, is not about me trying to get you to like me.
Right.
And it's not that hard to get people to like you. If you find out you have something in common. You and I were talking about our mutual friend Derek early on. That easily makes you start liking me a little bit more. If we find out other things we have in common, my wife's from Pittsburgh, you're from Pittsburgh, we talk about the Steelers, whatever, it's very easy for that to start happening. Or if I pay you a compliment, you feel good, you like that. But the key here, Steve, is that when I do that, I am starting to like you. Because it works as much on me as it does you. When I find out that we have friends in common and I see things that are worthy of a compliment, I'm convincing myself. And here's where the trust comes in. When you really begin to see that I like you, most of us believe deep down that friends do right by friends. And that's where the trust comes in. Because when you're looking at me and going, Brian really seems to like me and he really seems to care about me, I am more open to what it is that he might be putting on the table. I don't think he's trying to gouge me on price. I don't think he's trying to take advantage. And the good news is, Steve, I'm not. Because the more I come to like you, the more I want what's best for you. And we are able to stay in there and figure it out, as opposed to if we didn't have any like and trust going on.
Right. So I'd gather say, too, that's a great way to grow your business through word of mouth, too, correct?
Absolutely, because when people enjoy dealing with you and they look at you and they as that trusted advisor and they know that you have their best interest at heart, those are the people who are going to turn to others and say, you need to work with this person.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people. That's the least expensive way to grow your business. It doesn't cost a dime, and your potential new customers are hearing it from someone they already trust.
Absolutely.
And that's the best long-term relationships I've had, were those where someone liked me, they trust me, and they recommended me elsewhere. And that's where my, business has really flourished. So,
well, so when we talk about this trust too, and liking is an entree, but people also have to look at you as an authority in what you do. Because just because they like you doesn't mean they'll do business with you. You have to show that you have expertise. So people want to deal with a trusted expert. And one way of gaining some of that trust is by being honest and talking about your shortcomings. So your product or service may be higher than somebody else's. And by addressing that early on and saying, Steve, I just want to be upfront with you. Our services are a little more expensive here than what you're going to find with our competitors. However, and I take a word like however or but, and I transition, and then I begin to talk about the strengths. You start to view me as an honest broker, of somebody who's not trying to hold something back. So people mistakenly try to sometimes hide their weaknesses, never let them see you sweat. And I say, no, pretty early on, put them on the table. Let that other party, because they're probably thinking about it already. Get the preoccupation off the table, transition over to your strengths, and you're going to have a better sales conversation.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, they're going to find out anyway if down the pike if your product isn't everything it should be as well too. So that's a great way of really establishing that trust, letting them know you're not perfect, but or we're a little more expensive, but there's a reason why we are here as well too. So listen, I always say to sales folks, 90% of sales folks out there, external, the customers I'm working with, by the way, are used car salesmen and women. I don't mean that derogatory or necessarily real negative to used car salesmen. People think salespeople are always trying to stuff a product down their throat that they may need, but most likely won't need. And that's the last thing you want a customer to think of you as, another huckster, another used car salesman. That you want to, and this whole everything Brian's talking about too, you can verify this, is a way to create a point of differentiation for yourself as a salesperson, an account representative, or a leader, correct?
Absolutely. I think when you understand how to ethically influence others and you bring these principles into your communication, it feels different than somebody who is trying to strong arm you into something, who won't take no for an answer, who is trying to hide the weakness, maybe using a false sense of scarcity. All of those things that unfortunately so many people associate with salespeople, and that's why they don't want to deal with salespeople. But when you get somebody who really brings value to the table by pointing out things you may not have understood that could be a downside if you don't take the right action, that's where you start saying, wow, if I hadn't had this conversation, I might have made a bad decision.
Right. Where do you, how do you help people? Sometimes if there's that customer that loves you and they don't want to hurt your feelings and don't want to tell you no, the old, oh yeah, we're going to do this. Then guess what? It doesn't happen. Is there a certain style that people need to be aware of people whom are like that? Not in a negative way. Is it their general propensity to be, I like you, I'm loyal to you, but unfortunately we can't. How does a salesperson work through that person who says yes, but doesn't want to hurt your feelings because they like you?
Yeah, I say relatively early, give them permission to do that, where I can say, Steve, I understand that what I do is not for everybody. I see tremendous value in it. I think it could help you. You may not see that. And I want to give you permission to say, hey, Brian, as much as I like you, your product or service isn't right for me, or now is not the right time. And I tell them, you will not hurt my feelings because I understand that what I do is not for everybody. What I would just appreciate is just your being honest about that, because then I won't waste your time and you won't waste my time. Is that fair?
Bingo.
Most people would be like, thank you for taking that burden off of me. And now we can have a real authentic conversation.
Yeah, there are certain styles. They're just so people-oriented. They don't want to hurt feelings, or they don't want to say no, or they like you, and that's a tough one for sales folks. And sales folks typically get angry at those people. But I think what you're saying, have that discussion. Let's get this out on the table first, especially if you're reading. With what you're doing, are you teaching people to read the behavior or a certain style of others so they can know how to approach that person accordingly?
So one of the things that I talk about in my second book on persuasive selling is dealing with different personality styles. And it's not so much about you and your personality style as it is the person that you're interacting with. And so it's kind of a modification of DISC, and I call it DEAL: driver, expressive, amiable, logical. And it works well because as salespeople, we hope to close the deal. As individuals, we deal with people. So it becomes memorable. And for example, the driver is that person who's very task oriented, more so than relationship, and they want to be in charge.
That's right.
And so when you're dealing with that person, that's going to be different than dealing with somebody who is that amiable, the person who doesn't care about being in charge. They're very relationship oriented. You're going to approach them differently because there's different psychology that, according to a survey that I had done many years ago with hundreds and hundreds of blog readers, where they self-identified, and then I had scenarios and they made choices about how they'd respond. And for example, it was clear that when you're talking to somebody who's a driver, you want to tap into scarcity. What is it that they might not lose? People who are drivers hate losing. So what might they lose if they don't go along with what you're talking about?
That's right.
They are going to respect individuals and data. So you have to tap into this principle of authority. And then the other thing is what we call consistency, which says we feel this internal psychological pressure and external social pressure to be consistent in what we say and do. When you tap back into what a driver has already said or done, a lot of times it's ego, but they believe that what they said or did was right.
Oh, absolutely.
What you're offering with that makes it so much easier for them say yes. So that's kind of how you start differentiating some of the buying styles, and then using these principles a little more strategically than just blanket approach.
So once again, having a driver like you is much different than a way a amiable will like you. A driver is going to be, help me beat competition, help me win. I don't want to lose. Give me the information I need in short, sweet facts. Be bright, be brief, be bright, be gone. Hit me hard.
Yep.
Where the amiable is maybe about taking out to lunch, getting to know their wife, kids, and family, going golfing. So
Yep.
you flex and bend based off of that style to in turn get people to like you. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I always tell people, like, if you're going to go into a driver and there's something there about liking, yeah, you may want to tap into it. You may want to mention that person that you have in common, or, hey, I see you grew up in New York City, whereabouts, and you don't spend much time there. It's just a kind of a common point of connection, and that still helps. But the person who's the amiable, they may want to talk about that, and they may make a lot of their decision on how much they like you.
Right.
Saying the driver's bottom line is, how can you help me?
Yeah. Help me beat competition, short and sweet. Or do you teach so let's go backwards. Is the Cialdini method, or is deal within that element of the Cialdini method, or is it external? The four styles and Cialdini are two different things, or they blend together?
The styles are different in that I'm the one who came up with that. So, you know, there are 20 of us around the world who are certified by Cialdini. For example, one person, Dr. Chris Phelps, he's a dentist. He has a niche within the dental practice, and he comes up with ways to utilize this that are very specific to the dentistry practice.
Okay.
For me, working with salespeople, I always step back and look at how can I take these general principles and mold them in a way that is even more effective for the audience, particularly like insurance agents, to deal with. So when we talk about teaching Cialdini's method, I have a 2-day workshop that we do called the Principles of Persuasion. We dive in deep into the psychology and kind of a general methodology of using it. But then when I get people who are in sales, and again, particularly insurance agents, we focus on the sales process, which principles are most effective at each step in the process and why. We take a look at the personality styles, which ones are more effective with different personalities, because those salespeople, you know, when they're prospecting, they need to figure out, how can I be most effective in my prospecting? Oh, I've got this first meeting. What psychology would make me most effective to maybe continue the conversation, etc. So that's how it's different. It's the same psychology, but it's applied in different ways in some of my selling workshops.
So once I know your style and I use these skills of persuasion and whatnot, what do you teach people? Do you teach different avenues to persuade different people different ways, things of that nature? How do you get them to connect the dots between, I know this is a dealer, I know I've got to get them to like me. What do I do? How do you train people to do that?
So that's where we talk deeply about the different parts of the psychology. So the principle of liking, the principle of reciprocity, there's authority, social proof, scarcity, and consistency. And
those are the 6 elements of Cialdini methodology.
Yes. And then he introduced more recently a 7th principle that he calls unity.
Would you mind repeating those again, if you don't mind?
Sure. There's the principle of liking, which says it's easier for us to say yes to people we like. Reciprocity is the natural obligation we have to give back to people who first give to us.
Okay, excellent.
Authority tells us that we're more willing to follow the lead of someone we see as expert or wise. You know, 2 people are talking about taxes. One person goes, hey, I'm an accountant. We listen to the accountant.
Yeah.
Social proof describes the human tendency to follow the crowd, large and small. When we know lots of people are doing something, I mean, you just need to look at Amazon reviews and see how that impacts buying. But when we also see people who are very similar to ourselves, that is even more powerful to say, maybe I should be doing the same thing. Consistency, which I mentioned before, the internal and external pressure to be consistent in what you say and do, and scarcity, that fear of loss. What happens if I don't take this action? What might I lose? Much more motivating for behavior than talking about what someone may gain. That 7th principle that Cialdini introduced, I think it was in 2016 when his 2nd book came out, is called Unity. And Unity describes the reality that there are certain people that we feel a much deeper connection with. Family is the best example. there are things that we will do for family, even extended family that we don't know, sometimes maybe don't even like a lot, but because they're family,
Yeah.
we will extend ourselves in ways that we might not for our friends.
Yeah.
Another example was my father served in the Marines. And I always knew from the time I was a youngster that when my dad met another Marine, particularly one who'd been in combat, I thought dad's closer to that person than me, his own flesh and blood.
Yeah.
Now I understand because of what they
Yeah.
went through, they share a deep, deep connection.
Very similar to what we were talking about with Derek Dearwater and myself. A friend who introduced Brian and he and I worked together years ago. His name's Derek. And we both worked for the same company. And we had no business competing against the Procters and Gambles and Colgates of the world, yet we did. Because of the training, the hard work we did, we fought hard, and we always said we were the Marines of the consumer packaged goods industry. So I told Brian earlier, anyone who worked for Beecham has that same, to some extent, brotherhood, right? So, and that's how I met Brian. That's how Brian met me, through Derek's introduction. And that's how word of mouth works, right, Brian? So if you have that connection and that person's willing to step out and look at you as a brother, they are most likely going to feel that, hey, I'm going to recommend you to my friend who owns a business or another department in our organization. One of my biggest clients, it is unbelievable how my business has mushroomed within that organization, but also with other folks who used to work at that organization, now worked elsewhere. There's other people in the industry who got to know me, and it flourished because that trust, that brotherhood, that willingness to recommend my business. And as I said, that's the type of marketing that doesn't cost a dime and it's most effective.
Yep. I had an opportunity to see that, Steve, that when I was with the insurance company for a long time, I was doing training for the field sales associates. So in our 5 regional offices, I'd usually go to a regional office and I was there for 4 or 5 days. Unlike a lot of people I worked with, some people would fly in, do their training and fly home. And I'm so busy. And I'm like, no, if these people are going to implement what we believe will help them succeed, they have to know, like, and trust us. And the best way for me to make that happen is to get out there early, stay late, have breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks, social, do all this stuff. And so I formed a lot of deep friendships. And those are the people who, when I left the company, many proactively reached out to me. Many have been advocates within their organization to say, hey, here's the guy you got to bring in. And then even if they didn't proactively reach out, when I reach out to them, because they're busy, they are so willing to help me because I did so much to help them reciprocity. And you're right. Then that doesn't cost anything except a little bit of time to make phone calls and connections.
That's right. And also, I'm assuming during that time, you learn about their business as well, too, right? You uncover their needs, you understand their pain points, what's keeping them up at night. And that allows you in turn to customize your discussions and programs. Is that fair to say too?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that's nice in terms of what I do, teaching people the psychology of influence and persuasion, anybody who's been in the sales game for any length of time understands that this is foundational to being good at selling. And so some people may already be very good and they might say, I'm good. I don't need any help. I need more help over here and some other things. That's fair. But most people don't understand the science that I teach. And if they learn that science and these principles, then they can become a lot more strategic in terms of how they're interacting with their customers in very authentic conversations.
Yeah, that's right.
That benefit both parties.
That's right. And that's one of the things I try to do. All my customers are different. All their industries are different. And that's really what drives me in what I do. I uncover their needs, spend some time with them, hear their pain points, and I build programs relevant to them. And that makes my job fun because no industry is the same, no situation's the same, and each customer I have has unique ways where I can be of service. So I'm spot on with you. If you look at the greatest of leaders, they have that adaptability. They have the ability to persuade. Have you ever seen Band of Brothers?
Yes.
The HBO series. Do you remember Dick Winters, the head of Easy Company?
It was a while ago, so it's drawing a blank right off the top of my head. But
he was one of the main characters, and that he has a quote. I'm going to paraphrase it now, but it's something to the extent of, I don't lead people, each of my team, the same. Some people I push a little harder, some people I don't. Some people I know how to put in precarious positions, some I know not to. So he really had the hot buttons of all his soldiers and knew how to get the best out of them based off and persuade them, so to speak, based on their styles. And then Vince Lombardi had a great quote, paraphrasing again, that the key to his leadership was that he had to know how to motivate and lead and communicate with 40 different men, 40 different ways.
Yeah.
So the way he persuaded them was relevant to their personalities, so to speak.
I always like, there was a Tom Landry quote, and I might butcher this a little bit, but he basically said, my job is to get men to do things they don't want to do so they can achieve the things they've always wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to win the Super Bowl, right? Does everybody want to work hard enough to ultimately make that happen? And he saw that as his job. And I think you're right, because it is easier, Steve, for you or I or any leader to adapt and learn and try to adapt to some of the different people than to expect all these people to adapt back to you.
That's right.
That is just not going to be as effective as being that person who can adapt to each person, making that person feel like, wow, my leader knows me, my leader likes me.
Yeah.
I trust that individual. And I will say from a standpoint that, one of the best leaders that I ever had was the guy that I reported to when I was still at the insurance company. And the testimony to that is I'm having lunch with him today.
Yeah.
We both left the company over 2 years ago, and we still stay in touch, and I still go to him for business advice.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Now, is there, I'm assuming this whole persuasion thing, is there a tie to emotional intelligence? I would gather to say people who have high EQ or are more emotionally astute with knowing themselves, knowing others, and knowing how to adapt, have great persuasion skills. Or if you learn great persuasion skills like you teach, you can raise your EQ. Is that fair to say too?
I would say so, in that what we teach are not techniques. Because I always say, if you learn a technique and you're in a situation where the technique doesn't apply, you're dead in the water. Mm-hmm. But if you understand principles of human behavior and you're willing to step back, and then you have to internalize it so that it comes out in your own verbiage. For example, Steve, you've done sales training and been to enough sales courses. You're probably familiar with the feel, felt, found approach, right?
That's correct.
How you feel, because others have felt the same way, but here's what they found. Now, if you understand the psychology about that, right? You're empathizing. I understand how you feel.
That's right. That's right.
Why? Using the word because is very strategic, because others have felt the same way.
That's right.
Social proof. However, and now you're transitioning into what your strengths are. But if you teach people that as a technique, then everybody goes out robotically and they all sound the
same. Feel, felt, found.
Oh yeah, you were just at that training, because I recognize that. And so what I tell people is, here's a framework. But here's the psychology of why it works. Now internalize it, make it your own, so that instead of, I understand how you feel, others have felt the same way, I might say, Steve, I get it.
Yeah.
Because I've been at this for a long time. I get it. Right. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But if you give me a moment, what I can do is share with you some. So now it doesn't sound the same because it's internalized, and it's Brian Ahearn's voice that's coming through. That's the intelligence part of it. Take the information, make it yours so that it comes out in who you are.
That's right. Yeah. For those of you who don't know what feel, felt, and found is, it's a technique, 3-part technique in handling objections. A key decision maker, a buyer, gives you an objection. I understand how you feel. Others have felt the same way. What we found was X, Y, and Z. And what Brian's saying is those 3 things are great foundationally, but let it come out naturally. Is that fair to say? Exactly. So the feel piece is, I feel your pain. I hear what you're saying. Because what most people do, if they don't have a foundation of feel, felt, and found, is a customer gives them objection, they want to talk more, or they shut down, they get panicky, they don't know how to handle that. And what Brian's saying is, you don't have to literally say, I understand how you feel. What he's saying is, instead of pushing back, punching immediately, or shutting down because you don't know what to say, feel their pain, right? Show empathy. I hear what you're saying. That's feel. Found is, felt is, you're not alone. So don't worry about this. And I'm the solution for you. That's the found. So let it come naturally is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And there's that sense of when you do it the right way, that person can exhale a little bit, like, okay, good. I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who feels this way.
That's right.
But then when you can really show them that maybe their thinking on this was incorrect, or maybe the information they had was incorrect, and there's actually something better here. And that's the role of that salesperson, where hopefully somebody would go, you know what, going into this conversation, I thought X. And I was wrong. And I'm glad you showed me this because I'm better off now because of your product or service.
That's right. So everything you're talking about regarding persuasion, even a sub-skill of Phil felt found, can be used not only in sales, but leadership, even parenting, right? Team dynamics and things of that nature, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll give you one example that usually resonates with anybody who's raised a teenager. When our daughter was a teenager, it was not uncommon, Steve, in the hustle and bustle of the morning. You know, my wife and I are downstairs getting ready to leave for work. Daughter's down there getting ready to go to school. And my wife might turn to our daughter and go, Abigail, empty the dishwasher. Boom, we go to work and then she takes off for school. We come home at 5 o'clock, dishwasher not empty. And then we might go to bed and she worked. And so maybe she gets home later and then we wake up in the morning and dishwasher not empty. And now you don't have to think hard to imagine how that conversation is going to go between mom and daughter, right?
That's right.
Abigail, I told you to empty the dishwasher. And then the excuses come. I didn't hear you. I was busy. I was just about to do it. And I've always told people all of that could be avoided by simply incorporating a little psychology. One, tap into consistency by asking to get a commitment. So I would have said, Abigail, will you please empty the dishwasher before you leave for school? And then I just pause and I look at her. She either says yes and does it, or she might say, no, I'm in a hurry, I can't. And that's where I'd say,
when
well, wait
can
a minute.
you?
I'd say, will you empty it then as soon as you get home from school before you leave for work? Now, you know, Steve, and I know I could care less when it's emptied as long as it's ready by the time we get home at 5
That's
o'clock.
right. That's right.
So that psychology is part of reciprocity. When you give a little, people naturally will give a little in return.
That's right.
And now I'm not authoritative dad telling her what to do. She had a choice. She could do it now. She could do it later. And that's where your home life becomes a lot more peaceful and happy because you're not butting heads like that.
That's right.
So yes, I always tell people this is professional success and personal happiness when you really understand how to do it well.
Yeah. And I'm more, believe it or not, more of the amiable style. I'm a blended amiable driver, but my amiable style is I'm motivated by peace and stability. I want to do this, that I want to do this. I'm not a huge, great multitasker. So if someone wants me to do something immediately, chances are I'm going to bow up. But if they give me a little wiggle room in which to work, then I'll find that time. So that approach would work greatly with someone like me from that amiable perspective as well, too.
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes I would approach my daughter sometimes and I would say, Abigail, can I get a favor? And of course she's like, what? And I said, Mom's going to really be ticked off at me if you don't empty the dishwasher. Would you empty the dishwasher for me? And she loves her dad. And so usually, but you know, so it's just a different approach, right? It's not always robotically doing the same thing, but gaining a little bit of buy-in. Well, okay, well, what do you want me to do? Giving a reason, using the word because, that's a big psychological factor too. All of those things. And I get so much gratification out of this, Steve. My daughter has said, you know what? She goes, when I look back, she goes, if I were you guys, I wouldn't have done anything different. You guys were great parents. I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. That's the greatest word of mouth and thing you want to hear. So great on that. Excellent stuff. And again, folks, I think this is more important now, taking the time to think about who you're communicating with. Think of how you can build that relationship and persuade rather than tell or push or harangue. You know, that is going to carry a lot of weight, again, especially as we're in this intense world we're in now. And again, I don't think it's going to end because technology, the need at which we make decisions, that's all speeding up. So the ability to effectively persuade, understand that not all people are persuaded in the same way. All these factors are going to help you not only survive these crazy times, but thrive in them, whether you're in sales, leadership, personal, professional lives. Now, tell us a little bit about your two books, your first book and then your second book. What's your top lines on both that would be very helpful for our listeners to want to purchase your book or read your books?
So the first book is called Influence People, with the subtitle Powerful Everyday Opportunities to Persuade That Are Lasting and Ethical. And that's the word people. That's actually the acronym for people. I wrote that book because even after training this for a decade, I'd have people go through 2-day workshops. They still struggled a lot of times to put it into practice. And so I wrote the book to very simply explain the psychology. And here's like business case studies. Here's business application. Here's how you might use it in social media. Here's some other ways that you may use it. Very short, concrete chapters that I think people could read and go, I could do that.
Yeah.
The second book is very focused on selling. Now, my niche market is insurance and insurance agencies and field salespeople. But the book, even though it's called Persuasive Selling for Relationship-Driven Insurance Agents, is for more than just insurance agents, because it goes into that deal model. How do you use the psychology to deal with different personalities? And it looks at 8 steps in the selling process. So even if you weren't in insurance, if you're in sales, you're having to prospect, you're having to get referrals, you're having to make presentations. And I talk about what psychology is most effective at each of those steps. The examples that I use are insurance related, but any salesperson would be able to go, oh, I get it. That would be a good way to incorporate some psychology to be a better presenter, better at handling objections, et cetera. So one is really kind of a psychology book. One is more on the sales. And I'll say, Steve, that I'm actually way deep into a third book, which is going to be a story format, kind of like a Go Giver or Richest Man in Babylon. And it follows a young man, and it's just the story of his life, but how he's learning the same psychology that I teach, but from a story aspect. He's a young guy, gets his sales job in a medical supply company, and he begins to learn from training and coaches and mentors and clients. And he's just kind of like putting it all together, this philosophy of life and how these principles help you succeed at the office and at home.
So the book we're going, your second book has the case studies, correct, in them?
The second book does have some case studies at the end. The first book has some more generic business case studies.
And that's where I was going to go. Is it just different dynamics so people can relate to various situations, how these skills, how this methodology applies in an array of situations as well?
Right.
Yeah.
One example of a case study, I take a look at Eastman Kodak, and one point in the mid 70s, Kodak had 90% of the film market. And then they filed for bankruptcy. I forget when that was, early 2000s or something like that. And you wonder, how could you go from 90% of the market to this? And they didn't take seriously the digital movement. And I look at that and I think, what if some key people within the organization had really understood how to influence other people and had understood the psychology, so they could have framed that argument that we need to take action lest we not only lose market share, but something worse happens. And the reality was it did. So if they could have communicated that. So that's an example of how that might have done. And then the other one that I looked at too is that people might resonate with was when J.C. Penney moved away from their sales to their like everyday low price type thing. It was a disaster. And I thought that it was going to be a disaster, and then it proved to be. And I look at what's the psychology and why was that a bad move for them? So there's examples like that in the book.
Why didn't you interview me? Do you know my last corporate job?
Oh, I did see you were with Eastman Kodak. Yeah.
Hey, folks, Brian is exactly right. And, talk about the art of persuasion. You'll like this story. When I first took the job at Kodak, I was calling on a very large, one of the largest food retailers in New York, New Jersey. They had about 70% of the market share. And at the time, they really hated Kodak, and they hated their representatives, and they treated us and me originally as a vendor, beat me on price, asked me why I'm giving money to other, I just had them as a client, so I wasn't giving money to anybody else to lower their price, but I was getting my butt handed to them. I had no persuasive abilities because there was no trust, no relationship. And after about 4 or 5 months and 10 pounds lighter, me being 10 pounds lighter from stress, I started being able to build a relationship with them, really started uncovering what the true needs were. It was not price. When you really dug, scratched, and clawed and found out, they were worried about other things, competitive factors coming into play. These competitive factors, stealing market share, stealing their loyal shoppers. So in a short time thereafter, started building a nice relationship, and we really grew their business by double digits in an industry, film and one-time use cameras, that was in decline. So I was able to, as Brian says, persuade them and build that trust and build that relationship. But the thing that almost derailed it was everything Brian was talking about, their unwillingness to address the digital dynamic. So my client was beating me up on, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And on the other side, Kodak's going, tell them this, tell them this. I'm like, no. I spent a hell of a lot of time building a relationship here, and I ain't ruining it because I'm not telling the truth. So we'll have to talk more online on that one. But a lot of the skills Brian's talking about today, I used to help build that relationship at ShopRite, and it turned I said the retailer's name. It helped transition that relationship from one of distrust, viewing me as a vendor selling a commodity, to one of trust, relationship, growing the business. And it was, I often say, my worst corporate job that turned into my best corporate job as well too. So
that's always interesting, Steve, how the difficult customer, if you can turn them around, sometimes becomes the best. And I can think of, like, when I worked in my corporate job, sometimes the people who are most difficult internally, if I took that as a challenge, like, I'm going to see if I can turn this thing around, break through here. One person I'm thinking in particular became one of my biggest advocates when I left the company. He works for another large insurance company, and he has just promoted my name and helped me in so many ways. And that went from, I really felt like he doesn't like me at all, to one of my biggest advocates. In fact, I said I'm having lunch with my old boss later today, but I'm having coffee with this guy next week, and we've maintained that relationship, and it's great.
Yeah, it's funny. My main nemesis at that particular client, and I'm going to share two things about that. Every time he called, I think I wanted to drink a shot of that Jack Daniels because he drove me nuts. But now, every few years, I will call him up, see how he's doing, and we end up golfing together. So another thing that ties to everything Brian's talking about is, and we talked about this trust thing. When this gentleman did not trust me, I only saw one side of him. If we went to Brian's deal acronym, I saw him solely as a driver, to the point, no nonsense, yelling, screaming, direct, competitive. But once I was able to persuade, build trust, he had a heck of a lot of amiable in him that I didn't see before. But I didn't see that before because he didn't trust me. Is that fair to say, Brian? That whole dynamic, once someone trusts you, you see more of that onion. People are not necessarily DEAL. They're blends of those different styles too.
Well, I think when people are difficult, if they're difficult for you, it's good bet they're probably difficult for a lot of other people. And there's almost a self-defense mechanism that goes up where, I don't need a pat on the back to know I'm doing a good job. I'm not here to make friends, Steve, all that kind of stuff. But once you break through that, usually you find a pretty wonderful person. And those defenses are there because people are responding to them not positively. They have that first encounter, like, I don't think I want to deal with this person. And so rather than take that on themselves, like, and feel bad, they just put up these walls. But almost every time when I've broken through that, I have found a wonderful person who's funny and intelligent and has these cool hobbies and things. And I try to keep that in mind when I deal with other difficult people. Like, if I can break through here, I'll enjoy this person more, which is important. They'll enjoy me more, or we may form this friendship and everybody will be better off for it.
That's right. It's really fun to see that train. Some people may be painful at the time, but it was worth the battle. And it's, that whole dynamic I actually use as one of my keynotes or a story I tell in workshops. And it really resonates, especially with sales folks, because they know what it's like to have a difficult customer, and to see, be able to share a case study like you've done so well in your books, that they can relate with, then turns out well. It helps connect the dots between that pain and the success of that, and can re-hardwire the brain. Where can we get your books? I'm assuming they're on Amazon. Tell us where we can buy, best place to buy your books.
Amazon. So the first book, it's paperback, it's Kindle, and there's an audio version. The second book is just paperback and Kindle because it also supports a workshop that I do. So I didn't think that there was the need really to go the audio version on that book. But both of those are available on Amazon. If people go to my website, they're prominently displayed on the right where they could click on it. It would pop them over to Amazon where they could find it. But those are the two venues for the book.
And what is your website? How do people find your website?
The website is influencepeople.biz, B-I-Z.
Okay.
And if people go out there, there's just a ton of free resource. I've been on more than 100 podcasts. I've got all kinds of videos, been blogging for more than a dozen years. There are intros to the LinkedIn learning courses that I do. So people will have a tremendous amount. And then if they want to go deeper, then there are opportunities to do that too through speaking, coaching, consulting.
So you're on, you have your own website. Obviously, most people do. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. So is it fair to say just Google your name, Brian Ahearn, Ahearn,
Yep.
and there's plenty of stuff to find on you out there.
And for anybody listening, feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn. I connect with everybody. If you don't tell me that you heard me on the podcast, I guarantee you, I will send a note back and say, how did you find me? Because I like to understand why people are reaching out. But
Absolutely.
I think that puts the social back in social media because, then we'll have a little conversation going there. I'm a real person that you're connecting
That's
with.
right. That's right. Excellent. Excellent. So tell us, let's do a little, well, let's first go to any final, what's the main takeaway you'd like to give our, before we go into rapid fire wisdom 5 questions, what's the main thing, takeaway you want the listeners to take away from today? What's your main message?
I would say that from the moment we're born, I like to say from womb to tomb, we are trying to influence other people, right? A baby comes into existence and it has a need. It cries. Mom or dad has to figure out burp, change, feed. What do I need to do? But from that moment until the moment we die, we are interacting with people trying to get our needs met. And ethically influencing people is a key to doing that. So it only makes sense that you would learn to do it well. You have a huge upside in the business world for doing so, but you have a huge benefit on your personal life for doing it. So that's why I think people should give strong consideration to really trying to understand how to influence people.
Yeah. And I think my big takeaway is not, once again, it's not necessarily a new thing, but reinstilling the importance of this today. And the way people are influenced is relevant to them. Don't think influencing means we know everything about our wife, kids, and family. We go out to lunch together. It is going to depend on whom you're dealing with, what their motivators are, what their personality, what their behavior, what their background is. And that's where you flex and bend your style. There's nothing wrong with your styles or who you are. Right. It's just really raising awareness, acknowledging who you're dealing with and appealing to them as well, too. So that was a good reminder for me. So tell me, what's your favorite book? I'm assuming you're going to say both of yours?
No, those are going to be your favorites after you
Amen that. Love it. Love it.
I wrote an article a few years ago on the 5 books that influenced me most, but one that I will mention was Carmine Gallo's The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. For me, as somebody who is trying to convey a message, when I read that book, it made so much sense. And I could go over to YouTube and watch Steve Jobs presenting. And we all know that he was a master in terms of promoting Apple and learning what he was doing and then incorporating that into my presentations. It made a huge difference in terms of how people were responding. So that's one book that I would say had a big impact on me.
Outstanding. Outstanding. How about your favorite quote?
The one I come back to more than anything is something that my old high school football coach said. And then, excuse me, I learned later on it was the Roman philosopher Seneca who actually said it. But luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Okay. And Coach was always stressing, and I'm sure you know this too from athletics, Steve, that being ready for that moment that you get your chance to shine. That's what we've got to do. And I have seen throughout my life where that has come back to pay dividends. Example, last year, I was 1 week out from my TED Talk and it got suspended because of COVID.
Yeah.
I had practiced that talk 250 times to get ready. But I knew, after the moment of disappointment, I knew that it would come back to help me. And I'm going to go speak at my first live conference at the end of this month.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Live conference in a year. And the basis of it is what I would have been talking about in that talk. So it's like, I've been getting ready for this for a year. This is going to be easy. So it's the preparation, and I got the opportunity.
That's right. Excellent. Yeah. Well, I forget what Abraham Lincoln's quote is. If he has to chop down a tree, he's going to take the first 6 hours to sharpen his axe. Mm-hmm. That ties to that preparation time, right? I'm going to get a heck of a good axe, a nice sharp one, to make my life easier when I start actually doing the chopping. Yep. Who do you see as a epitome of a great leader?
It would be, his name's John Petrucci, and John was the person I reported to for quite a long time when I worked at State Auto Insurance. And John's ability, his understanding of people, his ability to sell, he came out of a sales background, his ability to manage projects and keep us on task, to relate to us as individuals. I always say he was a great boss and he was an even better friend. And I was really fortunate to work for somebody. I know sometimes friends work together and it ruins the friendship. Yeah. But for us, it enhanced the friendship. So we laughed a lot. We got a lot accomplished. And I see in what I talk about, how I took so much of what he taught me, blended it into who I am and what I teach, and then it comes out in something that's more unique to Brian. But the basis was so much of what I learned from John.
Interesting. Is he originally from Pittsburgh? There's a lot of Petrucci's in my hometown. Actually, I'm closely related to some Petrucci's, and I know our mutual friend Derek, his football coach, if I'm not mistaken, his last name was Petrucci, I think.
I don't know if he has any that are out there or not. I know that his family was from Central Ohio from the time he was a little boy, but they may have relatives out there. I'll ask him at lunch today.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. And again, I think Derek's coach was, his last name was Petrucci as well, too. So what's a skill set? I'm assuming I'm going to lay this one out there real easy for you. What's a skill set everybody should learn to be successful, both in their personal and professional lives?
Everybody should learn how to ethically influence other people. It will serve you well for the entirety of your life. And I think it's just fascinating too, to really understand how people think and behave. And when you see some of the research, you're like, wow, I never thought it could make that much of a difference. Yeah. So I hope people find it fascinating and see the, where the rubber meets the road, that this is making my life better.
Yeah. It sounds so common sense. People are like, yeah, I know, but so many people don't do it. That's and right. Understanding the art of how to do that. And that's what you shared today. Right. And one last question. What do you do to decompress and get away so you can enhance your influencing skills when you're stressed?
So every day when I wake up, I'm in early riser. I'm up a little before 5, and I'll get outside and walk a few miles to get my body going. I'll get on the treadmill and run 3 or 4 miles and stretch. And then I go back downstairs. I've got a really nice gym in my basement, and I'll work out for 30 to 45 minutes every afternoon. So I get 2-a-days almost every day of the week. And I love doing it. I've always enjoyed athletic competition and pushing my body and things. And so I'm very fortunate that I get to do what I love. And with the pandemic, knock on wood, it was awesome to have my own gym.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go do my escape. It is something called Muay Thai. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a martial arts form of kickboxing. So after we're done, I'm going to go punch some bags and kick some things. That'll be my decompression time, believe it or not. What's that?
I used to do Taekwondo. I was
did you? Okay.
For many years. My daughter and I tested together for our black belts. I went on, I got my second degree. And when she stopped going, it was really to be able to spend time with her. Yeah. I'm pressed for time, so I haven't been for quite a long time. But if she ends up having kids and my grandkids want to go do it, I will leap back into it, because it's an awesome thing, because you get to do it with your kid. Yeah.
I'd recommend any child get into martial arts as soon as they can, whether it's jiu-jitsu, some form of kickboxing like Taekwondo or Muay Thai or something else. I mean, it's just the discipline, the health benefits of it, but also you meet some great people. People don't understand the martial arts world is just, some people think they're so brutal, blah, blah, blah. They're the nicest people on earth, the salt of the earth, really. I started it late, and I wish I would have started a lot earlier, but I guess better late than never. So.
Yep. It is awesome. And it forces, running and working out doesn't take athleticism.
Yeah.
Doing martial arts, jumping, spinning.
That's right.
I realized that real quick, like, I'm in shape, but boy, I'm not athletic anymore. Yeah. It took a while to get back into that groove.
Yeah. So one last question for you with regard to the deal, the different styles. What are you?
I'm a logical. People always assume that I'm an expressive because of what I do, and I love being on stage and interacting with people. But when it's downtime, like I told my wife, we were having a conversation. When there's a social event, she loves to meet everybody.
Yeah,
I want to meet one person and have an in-depth conversation.
Yeah.
Because that other thing wears me out. But I've always been very analytical, and so I definitely fall into the logical category.
Yeah, I'm an amiable and driver, so a weird blend. But I empathize with you a lot of times, because when I'm stressed, I need my alone time to decompress and whatnot. So, well, that could be another topic down the pike. I thoroughly enjoy the time, Brian, and I think everyone else did. Please, folks, visit his website, Google his name, Brian Ahearn. And then, anything you purchase his book, find out what he does, give him a call, hire him for your organization to speak or do some consulting. I think it'll be well worth it. And again, especially as we're going through these crazy times. So thanks for your time, Brian. Look, I'd love to have you again. I think there's many other avenues we could take on this topic.
Absolutely. We'll do it. And if I'm in Florida nearby, we'll get together and share an adult beverage.
Yes, please do. That sounds great. That's another one of my ways of decompressing, so I love it. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed another episode of Grow, Transform, and Evolve, the place where we discuss all things personal and professional development. Have a great day.